So the next group is a different set of ratios, and this set of ratios deals with profitability. And we'll look at a couple of different levels of profits to do the analysis. First is net profit margin, and that's the net income attributable to common shareholders divided by sales. We looked at this measure the other day in class when we looked at the MicroDrive financial statements. We look at net income, but we want to make sure it's after we pay the preferred stock. Now, not every company has preferred stock, so there may be no dividends that would be necessary to consider. But in the case of a company that has preferred stock, see how much they pay in dividends, subtract that amount from net income, and you end up with this figure: net income available to common shareholders. The denominator is simple. It's simply sales. For MicroDrive, their ratio this year was 4.4%, and interpreting it is for every dollar of sales, MicroDrive makes 4.4 cents. And you need a benchmark, so here the benchmark for the industry, 6.2. Once again, we're quite a bit below. 4.4 compared to 6.2 is about 1/3 less than the industry. They're making money, but not as much as the industry. Next is operating profit margin. Fairly simple ratio. We take EBIT, which is operating earnings, divided by sales. Interpretation for MicroDrive in this case is, since they're at 10%, for every dollar of sales they have, MicroDrive makes 10 cents. The company or the book did not provide an industry benchmark, but I have a guess that the industry does a little bit better, right? Given what we see in the net margin, it's likely that every margin above it also has a similar pattern. All right, the next is gross profit margin. And gross profit margin is at the very top of the income statement. It's sales minus cost of goods sold. And in this case, the author just reiterates that we want to make sure it includes depreciation that's attributable to the cost of goods sold divided by sales. And if we do this computation based on MicroDrive information, sales was $5,000 and cost of goods sold plus depreciation was $4,000. Divided by 5,000 is 20%. Interpretation: for every dollar of sales, MicroDrive makes 20 cents of gross profit. The next is, again, slight variations on profitability. First being the basic earnings power. Basic earning power is EBIT, which we saw earlier. That's operating profit divided by the total assets. So this tells us, in MicroDrive's case, 14.1%. So for every dollar of assets we have, the company makes 14 cents, compared to an industry average of 20%. So again, MicroDrive is underperforming when compared to the industry. The second measure is return on total assets, and here we take the net income available to common shareholders. We just used that previously. It's net income minus preferred dividends divided by total assets. For MicroDrive, that results in 6.2%. So for every dollar of assets that MicroDrive has, it earns 6.2 cents for its common shareholders. And the average is 11. Once again, we're almost half, which is not good, of the profitability of the industry. The final one in this section is return on common equity. Here, it's net income for common shareholders divided by common equity. The total here is 15%, which means for every dollar in common equity, the company makes 15 cents. Seems okay because it's profitable. However, once again, the industry at large makes 19%. So we lag, once again, the industry. The next set of ratios relate to market values, and these look at a blend of financial data from the statements and market data, predominantly the stock value of a company. The first looks at the price to earnings ratio. We looked at this in our class this last week, and it means that you compare the price per share, and that's the publicly traded stock price, divided by the EPS. So the price to earnings ratio for MicroDrive is 6.1. So for every dollar of EPS, the stock is 6 times. So if the EPS is 2, then the price of the stock would be 2 times 6, or 12. Again, the industry is higher. At 10, the view of the industry by investors is more favorable than the view of MicroDrive in the eyes of the investors. And the last one we have in this section is market to book ratio. This one takes a market capitalization, and that's just a fancy phrase which means you take the stock price per share times the outstanding shares, and that equals the total value of the company. That's what market cap means. The denominator is total common equity, and that we find from the balance sheet, the stockholders' equity section. And again, make sure you exclude preferred stock. For Microdrive is 0.9. That means the market cap is less than the equity, which is not a good thing. Normally, we would see that the market value of a company is far in excess of its book value. So that again is a warning sign. All right, the next set of ratios we'll look at include the EBITDA ratio. EBITDA ratio is EBIT, which is earnings before interest and taxes. We add back depreciation and amortization. And so we divide that by sales and we get 14%. So for every dollar of sales, we make 14 cents in terms of cash flow. And EBITDA is a shorthand used by finance people to signify cash flow. The next one is the price to cash flow ratio, and that one we compare the price per share divided by the cash flow per share. The price per share is determined in the marketplace, and we'll look at cash flow that we determine from the cash flow statement and divided by the outstanding shares, and we are at 3.2 for Microdrive compared to 6.8 for the industry. So yet once again, Microdrive is underperforming the industry. You may remember a set of what we call disaggregations called the DuPont Formula, and I'll just review those right now. The traditional form of DuPont is a three-factor disaggregation, those three factors being the profit ratio, which is net income divided by sales. Second one being the total asset turnover, which is sales divided by total assets. And the third factor is what we call an equity multiplier, which is assets divided by common equity. So in this case, if we looked at the components for Microdrive, their profit margin is 4.4%, which means for every dollar of sales, they make 4.4 cents. The total asset turnover is 1.4, which means, again, for every dollar of assets, they generate $1.4 of sales. Multiplier is 2.4. For every dollar of common equity, they have $2.4 of total assets. When you multiply those three together, you end up with 15%, which means for every dollar we have in equity, we make 15 cents. The interpretation can be at the total level, at the 15%, or we can analyze each of the three components individually, and we usually benchmark it against a trend analysis over time or industry averages. The second, more simplified version of the DuPont formula is a two-factor disaggregation, and those two factors are net income divided by assets times total assets divided by equity. The first one is return on assets, right? Return is income divided by assets, so it's return on assets. That's 6.2%. And then once again, if we look at the equity multiplier, we end up at 2.4, and of course we end up with the same ROE of 15%. ROE has to be the same. We're just using different factors to do the analysis.